I'm
Go
sure
ahead.
someone else, I'm
So
sure
as
someone
everyone just heard, we are recording this session. Uh, Again, thank you so much, Radar. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself and start the topic.
Okay.
And of course, I'll monitor the chat. And of course, that's another cool thing about this event. Since it's so intimate, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself if you have any questions, or if you feel a little shy, I'll be monitoring the chat and could communicate those to Radar.
Okay. So, nickname is Radar. Actual name I was blessed with by my not so kind parents was Daryl. So you can oftentimes find me under either or, and I will provide a LinkedIn link further in the presentation if anybody is interested. I have a background of about 15 to 20 years in cybersecurity and GRC. I've worked with Broadcom during what was one of the, as I understand it, one of the largest technology mergers in history when Broadcom acquired Computer Associates, Symantec, World Brocade, and then it was also merged with Avago. So fairly large. So I got to be the guy that was hands-on responsible for aligning the enterprise risk and compliance program and their third-party risk management, and was the point guy for all inbound requests for the cybersecurity posture and compliance of Broadcom for all of its global customers as well. Also ran cybersecurity and compliance for a multinational oil, gas, and chemistry diversified conglomerate. I've been an ISOC member since 2010 and done a few other things. I'm also on HCC, Houston City College's NSA Center of Excellence, the IT board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff there to unpack, but I won't bore you with any more of that. One of the things that I've gotten involved with over the years through, I guess, adjacent or incidental to my deep geek wheelhouse of the third-party risk and supply chain risk, has been trying to figure out why we're having all of this increased cadence of serious cyber attacks, and maybe what the third line of defense can also do about it. So I've kind of looked at it holistically, and I have bounced some of my findings off people like the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency's DevSecOps program, the guy that actually ran the whole thing for, I think, close to 10 years. So, and he seemed to agree with my findings and so forth. So, try to do deep research on it. So we're going to get into it. One of the things I'm going to warn you about is I have a second presentation that if people survive this without any intellectual casualties, maybe I'll get invited back for the 60 slideshow on specific things that auditors can do. So we're going to hit the high points, and I'm going to show you why it's important today.
Radar, we'll be looking forward to that.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second.
Excellent.
And please let me know when you can see it. Okay. How about now?
Still waiting. I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay.
It's thinking about it now. There we go. We see your presentation.
Okay, very good. Now, I tend to do things that are a little tongue-in-cheek sometimes, and I apologize in advance. So, I'm not that familiar with Zoom, so I'm fumbling for just a minute. So while I tap dance.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, you should be good there if you click that.
Okay. Okay, good. Got it. Okay. So one thing to recover is understanding and auditing your software supply chain and the CI/CD pipeline. And we're going to delve into SolarWinds, which I know a lot of people are familiar with, but we're going to talk about why it's important and particularly how it impacts auditors and how auditors could impact it as well. And that ties into the whole thing that we're talking about regarding the CI/CD pipeline. So SolarWinds. I apologize if you already know all this information, but I'm going to go ahead and run through it real quickly for a refresher. So it was named Sunburst. It was perpetrated by a Russian hacking group and attributed to what they call APT 29. Some people call it Department 29. They accessed the software build environment, put a backdoor in, and the automated build environment that existed was easy for them to compromise because they put legitimate code with malware files in right before the execution point, so it was not detected. They avoided version control, source code repositories. They used specific tooling. They mimicked build behavior. It was very sophisticated. This is kind of a diagram of how they did it. You can see here they access the SolarWinds network. Now, what I'm going to say here is even now, years later, they're not certain about how they actually got to the point where they accessed the network. So there's 3 or 4 different ideas that they had. We don't have to dig into them today, but I just wanted to get that out there. So once they were in, they tested the code. They added malicious code to the updates. Customers downloaded it, contained that code. That code sent a signal to the Russians' infrastructure, let them know that they were in, and they used the malicious command and control codes to spread and propagate. And that just cascaded onward. So impacts were 18,000 customers, not individuals necessarily, but 18,000 entities downloaded that compromised software. All of the, I'm not going to read the slide to you because nobody likes that. But the CISA, the DOD, the CISA of all groups, the DOD, DOJ, National Institute of Health, DOE, Treasury, and all of the agencies within the Treasury Department were compromised, including the Secret Service. The NSA, NASA, and all the DOD were exposed, and in secrecy speak, it means they were probably also compromised. And all of these other major corporations here that are listed, compromised. Even Malwarebytes and CrowdStrike. And CrowdStrike will come up again later. So as of the current status, and by current, it was last month when I did this, they're still experiencing post-compromise persistence and undetected activity, and they don't know. It's so elusive that it smacks of the SolarWinds, but there's still so much about it that they do not know that they can't attribute it specifically to SolarWinds. So there are additional affected networks that they don't know. There's downstream damage that is what they call incompletely known at this time. So these are components of why SolarWinds is so important, because it was kind of the grandfather of the modern attacks that we're dealing with today. So, and another reason why it still matters is this was the first cyber attack that a CISO was named as a defendant in a cyber disclosure case. So you see here that this is still going on as of July, and then as September 12th, it was still pending. There was some additional action after that. I don't think that they have resolved it entirely at this point still. So there are several critical focus areas: risk assessments with a third party and supply chain cybersecurity. Apparently, those were not being adequately reviewed. And that is something that auditors should be making a point to dig into. I know that some places the auditors do not. Sometimes there's difficulty communicating with the business owners within the enterprise to get that done, but it is highly important. Uh, Again, stringent controls over the software supply chain, patch management, authentication, and then there's gaps often in IT controls and board oversight, which some of this can be tied into the SOX compliance as well. It's kind of pivotal for us when we have our audit hat on to refine the practices around these cybersecurity audits, especially the infrastructure risks and again the third-party dependencies. So really what this ties into is not only do you have to worry about your third parties, but you have to worry about your fourth parties and your nth parties. So the parties are the parties of your parties, and we'll cover that in a minute. And that also ties deeply into the supply chain security. And then another group to partner with during this is also going to be your incident response teams as well. So Timothy Brown's problem wasn't because he was hacked. That wasn't good. And that wasn't SolarWinds' problem per se. The real problem is Timothy Brown didn't stand a chance. He may have made some mistakes. That's for the courts to decide. But he was blindly attesting to something he could not see or have knowledge of. And that's the CI/CD pipeline. And for those of you that may not be as familiar with it as others, because this kind of starts digging into DevSecOps, and it's relatively new area for a lot of auditors. Some of you, I know you're all exceptionally accomplished and seasoned professionals, but from what I've been able to ascertain, a lot of auditors in audit groups are just now realizing that they need to dig into the CI/CD pipeline. So the CI is the continuous integration. So it's where the code is automatically integrating the changes into a shared repository for tests, artifacts, that type of thing. The continuous delivery or continuous deployment automates the release of the artifacts to the next level, to staging, production, users, what have you, depending on how the build process is done. And this is to kind of accelerate and automate the processes to make the code from ideation and development to production. And unfortunately, minimal human intervention. So this is a more robust version of what it looks like. So you've got your application source code repositories, the projects, an app manifest with a list of dependencies. You've got the developers doing their magic into those. And you've got the build scripts configurations, and that moves from packaging to distribution. And in the packaging, you've got local dependencies, open source repositories, looping back into the build. And you've got the indirect dependencies. And this is an interesting point to make note of. Back when software used to be all happily and securely built normally within a single organization behind firewalls and other protective measures, now it's all open and exposed. So 70% of software makes up the code that exists today. So it's a massive amount. And then as part of that, you want the SBOM. And as you all know, a lot of the frameworks require that an SBOM is done on any software that is distributed, purchased, built, acquired, used, etc.
Radar,
So
quick
yeah.
question for you. I know you're probably going to delve into this a little deeper later on, but have you ever come across a situation where you're talking to the people that own the CI/CD pipeline or the deployment process, and they say, that's our development environment. It doesn't have to be as controlled. It needs more flexibility to be able to deal with our administrators and our developers. It's lower risk. How would you, if someone was to say that to you, how would you address that?
Well, we are kind of going to touch on that right now. So funny you should.
Okay.
I promise I did not pay Jonathan to do that. So this is a kind of a standard example, a simplified one, but it is a standard example of the CI/CD pipeline. And you have, and if I had my little pointer, I'd use it. Developers, the source, the build, the packaging, that's distribution, the dependency, and the open source. Fairly standard, fairly innocuous. Well, here's the real story. So the CI/CD is the new attack surface. So every part of the entire development process is constantly under attack, and we're going to get into some of those attacks. So there are things such as typo squatting, which if anybody wants to know what that is, I can explain it. But the other part that's coming up that I'm not even notating here because it takes us down a whole other path is how AI is supercharging all these attacks. And so an AI could take, for example, typo squatting and do something called slop squatting. And slop squatting takes advantage. So the bad actors take advantage of AI code hallucinations. And hallucinations in AI code refers to things that to erroneous information that AI possesses that was either put there deliberately or by accident, but bad actors can farm that and turn it into a massive threat. So that's just one thing. So what we're looking at here is you see the letters, the A, the B, C, D, E, and so forth. So I'll just you guys kind of look at that for a second. Okay, so each of these letters corresponds to a gap or a space that is typically not monitored, or it may be ad hoc monitored or and usually not logged. And it's quick to see how this can go south very fast. So between developers and the source, you can have bad code submitted to the source repository, and a lot of NPM attacks have come from this. So the open source maintainer of one of the NPM package called Color has had intentionally reduced offending commits that adds an infinite loop to the source code and allows it to propagate. Then there's for B, you'll see a compromised source control platform. So attackers have injected compromised PHPs, self-hosted GitHub, and they put in malicious commits. And it goes on. And we go to D, which is a compromised build platform, which is ties back to the SolarWinds. So the implant that they installed injected malicious behavior during each and every build. And as you can see, moving on forward, you've got the risky dependencies for the event stream. You've got F, if you look between build and packaging, there's code gov. Attacker uploaded the code gov bash uploader script, which exported secrets, credentials, and other sensitive data stored in CI systems and sent it to a bad actor server. And these are just a few. These are just pieces. This is not even the entire picture. So this should give you an idea. And it should give your DevSecOps folks a wake-up call. It's like they may either be somewhat aware of it, or they may just be blissfully thinking, we're DevSecOps, we know what we're doing, we think in binary code, and we don't need to listen to anyone else. It just kind of depends on the personality. But I have discovered, going back to your question, Jonathan, that DevSecOps will listen to you they'll pay more attention to what you're saying if you demonstrate technical knowledge of this process. Some people have it, some people don't. But when you do, they do tend to listen to you more
That's fair, Rick.
frequently.
Thanks.
Sure. And then so this has led to what I call blind trust architecture, which is kind of the less successful cousin of the zero trust architecture. So, and what I mean by this is you look here, you see the developer, the source, the build, the package, distribute. Can everyone see my cursor? by any chance?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
it's moving around.
okay,
We can see it.
okay, good. All right. So you've got the developer, you've got the source, the build, package, distribution. We just saw this. So these red areas between the apps, the binaries, the Dockers, the operating system infrastructure, this exists for each one of these stages. So during the journey from code to cloud, you go through all of these. So what's happening is there are blind spots in each of these red areas, which means that every single pipeline stage layer is an attack vector. And they can modify the libraries, executables, configurations, container security parameters. They can inject malicious files, substitutions, scripts for exfiltration, all of these things and more than what I've covered or what I've mentioned so far. Is everyone kind of with me so far?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. So the software supply chain, obviously the CI/CD command line is a component of the software supply chain, particularly for those companies that build their own software. Not all companies build their own software. Some people simply purchase it, but things come into play when software is modified in any particular fashion. So your in-house software, the software you have acquired externally, the packages, the libraries, frameworks, the build tools, all of the infrastructure, the cloud services, the deployment, the third party services, APIs, all of these things from ideation of the code and the software to the delivery and use of the end user is part of the software supply chain. Give you an idea of this. So this is a mock-up, so disclosure. So let's say that Synoptic, CrowdStrike, no, I'm not picking on them, and Fiserv are your third parties. Let's say they're your only third parties by some crazy quirk of the universe. If you go out here and you look, you can see that just Fiserv has all of these vendors, all of these third parties. Adobe Systems, Salesforce, Agari, Cloudflare, RiskVision, Zoom, Dynatrade, Workday, on and on and on and on. And then each one of these has its own. And each one of those has their own parties. And each one of those has their parties. And this can go on to an absurd point. It basically just goes on and on and on to the parties. Now, the thing to remember is that all of these are connected. So all the software is connected to your environment, whether you know it or not, in some form or fashion, usually through code, but sometimes simply through the network and touching somebody else to touch you, to touch you, to touch them, to touch that. It's almost like a virus spreading. So there's a few tools out there, as you can see, that some of these uh, DevSecOps teams use. There's the static code analysis tools, there's automatic testing, there's the security scanning tools like Sneak, Veracode, Fortify, Nessus, Qualys. There's the CI/CD tools, the GitLab, Jenkins, CodeShip, and there's code review tools. Like GitHub and GitLab are meant to take care of pull requests. There's dependency tools like Maven and NuGet, and containerization like Kubernetes and Docker, OpenShift, and on, and monitoring and collaboration and the version, all of these tools. So there's a lot out there.
Radar, going back to what you were saying a minute ago, as far as the third parties go,
Mm-hmm.
not just the relationships that we have, but also those that we don't even think about that we have, such as subscription services or even API calls, could be a risk that we're not necessarily thinking about as well. Um,
Correct.
because essentially, just because you don't have a contract with, or just because you don't have a contract with that individual doesn't necessarily mean that you're not utilizing them as a part of your process control. So I think that's something that may be missed sometimes as well when we're thinking about our third party population, our third party inventory, is the connections we have to systems that are unknown either by intention through shadow IT or those that are just missed because we don't think about the connection that we have.
That is exactly right. And thank you for that point on the third party risk. And that is exactly why third party risk needs to be addressed as more of a threat than it has been, or as more of a vulnerability than it has been, because a lot of times it seems like it's an add-on to other duties for either a director of security and compliance or a CISO or something, and they don't give it as much relevance as it needs to have. Third-party risk, what companies, what everybody's after from a third-party risk standpoint is they're looking for an informed translation of the residual risk relative to the value of the good and service, what have you, that the enterprise acquires. And obviously, it's easier to hold those parties accountable to doing what they need to do for their due diligence and provide it as early in the acquisition process as possible. But yes, everything that you said, Jonathan, is spot on. And I've got a whole nother third party risk type of thing that goes across all of the domains of the various components of third party risk and what to look for and so forth. So fair warning.
Radar, just a quick jump in. We did have
Oh,
a question come in talking
oh,
about how can we utilize SOC 1 to, ISO 27001 reports to gain confidence in our vendors, as far as how that's utilized. Do you have any thoughts about that?
um, you can use it, SOC 2 useful as well, but that's a piece of, so SOC reports are a piece of the review and assessment process. So when you're looking at the third party risk and you're trying to look at the inherent risk and arrive at the residual risk, that document is important, but you also have to take a more holistic look at things. And as quickly as things are changing now, point in time security assessments and compliance assessments for third parties is frankly, in my opinion, not cutting it anymore, because these attacks have such cadence, such frequency, so much vulnerability within each of them that a 6 month or a year old, just under a year old SOC report, it's going to give you a basis and a foundation maybe of additional um, data or artifacts to request from that vendor, from that supplier to provide you. But the weight of those is rapidly dropping.
But Radar, the bridge letter says nothing has changed. So the control environment's exactly the same today as it was 6 months ago. I say jokingly,
I
obviously.
get you. Yeah. Yeah. That's, thank you for helping make my point. Absolutely. And that's the problem. Nothing's changed for them that they know of, but everything is changing constantly. And that's why continuous monitoring tools are an important asset. So if you get something that can, and don't get me wrong, the point in time assessments where they sit up and they pay attention and they, give you what you need, whether it's the policies, procedures, the plans, all these type of things that they do provide. These artifacts are useful, and it makes them do it, and it makes them understand that they are to be held accountable. But the real value, additional value, comes from the continuous monitoring tools like Black Kite, for one, or BitSide or whatever. I just mentioned Black Kite because I've actually used Black Kite. I used it at Cox Communications and actually brought it in and integrated it with, let's see, who was that? Um, the company name is one of the major GRC platforms, not ServiceNow. Help me out here. What was the other one? The big one, OneTrust.
Ah, yeah.
Integrated with OneTrust. I've done a few of these. They start to kind of blur um, with OneTrust, and it cut the. Not only did it make it more efficient, but it also made the information more valuable. And then we were able to tie in those upcoming alerts and make the incident response team aware of it and able to plan and respond accordingly. So, long-winded answer to a simple question.
That's great, Radar. There was one more question if you want to take that now, or we can hold off for a bit.
Sure, that's fine. I'll take it.
Okay. Talking about contract management and auditing of the third party contracts, do you think that would help catch some of these risks or loopholes that are associated with the third party risks?
Yes, 100%. Um, when when I lost, 2 or 3 years of my life at Broadcom, I wasn't able to say no to anything. And one of the things that I was requested to do was work with legal. And I didn't understand that that meant getting with legal for every single large customer that was pushing back on some of the cybersecurity requirements within the contracts. And that was a great hill to establish a beachhead, a defensive position, and start at that point early on. So yes, and it did reveal things that I won't mention here, but it did reveal issues. A couple of times there were things where they had a certain configuration or a certain specific enterprise-wide provider that their business was dependent upon, and that we had more or less had blacklisted. So there are a couple of times in note where that did become very important. Great question.
Thanks, Radar.
You bet. So this is one of the new attacks. Some people call it the Dune Worm. And this came through the JavaScript repository, and it infected multiple packages, and it even hit CrowdStrike, which kind of gives you an idea of how sophisticated these attacks are. So that's one. And then there's what they call the great NPM heist. And of course, the pundits were calling it the crypto heist of the century, billions of JavaScript downloads, massive supply chain attack, et cetera, et cetera. And this was a CICD compromise, another one. And it accounted for over 2 billion weekly downloads. But the upshot wasn't the amount of crypto that was taken. It was more, it only took, I think, like 950 bucks, about $950 in crypto. And I don't know how to translate that necessarily into real world dollars, but it wasn't substantial. The main destruction in expense was in the mitigation and the tap dancing that took place to fix it, but it was still very significant. There's the Ghost Action campaign. GitHub workflow was compromised, 3,300 plus secret stolen as of the time of this release. I have learned not, when I'm doing a presentation, not to go and check the very latest attacks because I will never finish the presentation because I'm constantly updating it. So I've made myself stop at 30 days. If I see it, I'll put it in, I'll deep geek research it, and I'll lose half a day doing it. It's important to be current, but there's a point of diminishing return. So this is the big one, the hot one lately, the Jaguar Land Rover. or Jaguar, 1.9 billion. You can see there Queen Elizabeth is looking down and she's not happy. Oh, auditors could have reduced the likelihood and impact of this with rigorous auditing, strengthening the access controls, reviewing the network architecture, monitoring systems, and of course, here we come back to the supply chain security, and then employee training and awareness also tied into it. There were multiple vectors of there are multiple issues across multiple vectors, basically, but the supply chain security and their lack of rigorous auditing of the access controls and the supply chain security were one things that made this as devastating as it is. And on an anecdote, I know a guy that was he was the basically head of the Nevada Gaming Commission, and his complaint was that now he is still waiting for his Land Rover. So the quality of our problems. And here's kind of a timeline of the events and the actions. There was an earlier breach of Jaguar Land Rover by a third-party contract year credentials, which allowed exfiltration of data. And so this is where the third-party risk assessment, vetting, and strict access controls would come in. There was targeted social engineering and wishing to steal valid credentials. And this is where testing MFA and other access controls comes into play. Here's where we pull back into continuous monitoring and anomaly detection. Here they're talking about a course for the IDS, IPS type stuff. But this is also where continuous monitoring of your third parties would provide value, because a lot of these tools, pretty much no matter who you use, are sophisticated enough now that they get, I guess you call it emerging threat intelligence, and can set alerts that your teams should be alert and take necessary action, or even send you based on attack, send you an alert letting you know, hey, we've detected this particular code in this vendor, and you need to contact them to see what they're doing to mitigate it. Or in some cases, to make sure they're aware of it, because sometimes that vendor may not even know they've got that issue. And then, of course, checking the network segmentation, DLP stuff, auditing the endpoint security controls. And this is important. And this kind of falls into, the role-based access control, least privilege, active incident type thing, which also in its own turn kind of ties into business continuity and disaster recovery. And a very quick and not that exciting anecdote was when I was at Broadcom and COVID occurred, I wound up writing the privileged access management policies and procedures for the elevated security steps and technologies required for people that had the privileged access management, particularly in the PCI 3DS realm for their software as a service component at Computer Associates, what to do for that, and then add that to the disaster recovery, business continuity planning, and then have it execute during COVID. Oops. And then, of course, there's the forensic analysis, and then strengthening of the cybersecurity posture from there. As we get into late September, you kind of see the idea, how this attack was built. And this is by no means comprehensive. It's just some high points, but it gives you an idea. Now, all the modern attacks are hitting inside the CI/CD pipeline, like we talked about. SolarWinds, JetBrains, which hasn't really gotten a lot of publicity, but it was still significant. And that's the fact that it's not publicly disclosed kind of gives you an idea. All the GitHub actions, there's multiple GitHub actions, but this one's actually a hack called GitHub Actions. And there's a Lazarus group. And these are from obviously 6-month-old attacks. I mean, some are older, but this particular slide I built 7 months ago.
So Radar, I got another quick question for you, if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Oh,
So the conversation that I could see happening with our with a development team is okay, but everything we do is internal. We have it's in our instance of Azure, it's in our secret, it's in our proprietary GitHub, yeah, our Git repository. So we're protected. What would be your answer to that? To say, because in these instances, were all of these, did they have a public exposure of some kind, or were they internal network related issues?
the exposure comes from the code. So, what is AWS built on? Where did that code come from? What were the updates? Who did the updates? Were those updates vetted? Were there any exposures in that? And we're kind of, and I'm glad you mention that, because we're kind of coming to that point that I'll get into that to showcase a little bit more about, or discuss a little bit more about these actual vulnerabilities. Because oftentimes these companies put out what they think is, we'll call it clean software, and it's not. And it ties back into, again, that 70% of software is open source. And there's a significant portion of that software that is already, we'll call it exposed, and it just hasn't been seen yet. It's like a latent virus waiting to happen. So, and that's because of all of those gaps that I showed you. That's hmm, give or take 42, yeah, about 42 areas of blind risk that no one has seen. No one has checked it. No one has looked at it. It is wide open. So that's why this cadence of attacks is coming from the CI/CD pipeline. So yes, there's, it ties into the supply chain, third party, nth party, all that stuff, like I mentioned. But the CI/CD is pretty much wide open. And even if they've got it behind their firewall, what have you, it's still a problem. And that also calls into play and question SBOMs, which is something else. So I prefer to give simple, concise answers to questions, but unfortunately, with the CI/CD vulnerabilities as they are, there's this cascade of effects that occurs from those vulnerabilities, and there's another cascade of issues that further exacerbates that. So it's not actually able to give you yes, no, one bag, two bags, three bags full or answers.
That's perfect, Radar. That's fine. Go ahead. Thanks. I appreciate that.
And no worries. So log4j, and this was something that I specifically spoke with that former CIA DevSecOps director about, and what they did to rectify that issue and the steps they took. And I showed him the research that I'd done and kind of dug into the code a little bit. And at first he was like, yeah, well, we did this, and we did that. And then I got another guy I know he has a much big propeller spinning on top of his head than I do. And he showed him just exactly what the issues were and what could have been done and what could be done, and the light bulb went off. So that was at the point that I'm making very, very confident about the things that I'm saying. So Log4j, as you mentioned, it highlights the pervasive and hidden nature of dependencies in modern software. And that is at least 70% of the software. So you see here, a lot of them didn't know they were using Log4j. So this is where SBOMs and dependency scanning tools come into play. Dependency scanning tools aren't going to do it for you just by themselves. And there's another problem with SBOMs we'll get into here at the end, but that will tie us into another presentation. So the CI/CD is attactive, attack plus attractive. I expect a couple of royalties out of that at some point, so thank you. So basically, it executes with high privileged identities, but it doesn't even need that to execute. It can execute very simply with little access required, but providing privileged access within your CID development pipeline does massively help. The other thing is there's a direct access to production. It's wide open now. And to say it's often inadequately secured is charitable, and this is not besmirching any organization or what they do. It's just the nature of how it is because this is a fairly new uh, vector. So there's a lot of complex environments, a lot of components, and then of course the automated process is where the real danger is because if you don't have human eyes on it and AI is compromising either AI or the code that someone actually wrote themselves, and there's no trigger because AI has outsmarted it, and that's a big problem. So things to keep in mind is CI/CD pipelines are critical infrastructure. There's the direct path to production, high privileged access once you're in. Target of sophisticated attackers are going after this, and the thing is now it's not even there. A lot of them aren't even that sophisticated. You're even getting some uh, script kiddies and low-level ransomware people that are buying uh, some of these exploits off the dark web. But the real key point is you've got to audit that with the same rigor as any production system. So you can, obviously segment development from production, testing from both, but you still have to audit your test bed as rigorous as you do your productive system. And then obviously your framework, and of course that will be industry specific to whatever you're doing. If you're critical infrastructure, you're going to have the NERC benefits and probably next NERC 13 for bulk energy suppliers, or if you're financial, you've got OCC, FFIEC, that kind of thing. Um, there's it really just depends on your industry. I don't want to belabor that too much. OWASP has some great ideas. I'm on one of the OWASP working committee. Actually, I'm two or three of the OWASP working groups, and they're doing a phenomenal job on CI/CD security. And that's kind of where my 60 slide presentation comes in for that. Um, Critical areas, secure configuration, nothing comes out as default. Secrets management, never hard code secrets into your code. Identity access management, we've covered. Dependency management is very important. We didn't really cover it that much. There's integrity assurance, and of course, the logging and monitoring. And then there's validating the code against real world breaches. And this is what I like. SolarWinds, CodeGov, and other exploit guests are addressed by OWASP, like I just mentioned. Every control that they put in prevents real attack vectors. So again, OWASP top 10 is a good one. Organizations that implement those reduce their risk dramatically. And then of course the compliance drives the audits. And so it just kind of once again depends on if you're ISO 27K or if you're NIST, NERC, all these others. So if you're an auditor and you're not assessing CI/CD environments within your organization, you should probably bring that up. I call automation a frenemy, which means I'm not a Luddite. I know that tools assist the audits, particularly with uh, speed and reviewing things like firewall logs and all that kind of stuff. But I also call it a frenemy because uh, it lowers the number of auditors required to provide effective work papers, and that can be a little bit of a problem. But it does make the automated evidence collection more efficient and lets you focus on analysis and recommendations once you kind of parse out the data you're looking for. And then again, collaboration with your DevSecOps folks. Learn a little bit about it, have conversations with them now, be buddies, And when you have practical recommendations, they're more likely to listen to you. And then again, this is important to continuous improvement. So the CI/CD security, again, is not one and done. The threats are constantly evolving, and by constantly, I mean weekly. So the regular audits are essential, of course. I know that external auditors oftentimes will require at least an annual, some cases quarterly, just kind of depending on the business, but continuous monitoring and proof of continuous monitoring is really what you should have, at least in the DevSecOps area, DevOps. So again, you've got to understand the ops practices. You've got to, your companies need to train your developers on security awareness across the entire software development lifecycle, and then check the third-party integrations and plugins, because that's a whole, that we talked about, that's a whole other vector. And then securing your artifact repositories. And then again, we covered the why on number 10. Questions so far? And I see we're coming up on time.
Yeah, we're about 5 minutes out. So obviously it looks like you're ready to sum up everything. So if you want to give your closing comments, last thing I just want to add is that I think the development environment as a whole is something that as auditors we have difficulty addressing, and we don't always look at as directly as we should, and there's significant risks there. Developers just as a whole have always treated their development environment as kind of a sandbox that they can play in and leave passwords in clear text and leave things that they would never have in production sitting there, and it's something that attackers and other threat actors have figured out, and that is now a crown jewel type target for those type of attackers.
I 100% agree. Very well said. And it is. CI/CD pipeline is the most vulnerable and important underbelly of your largest attack surface, which is your software supply chain as part of your third-party risk. So everybody that you're doing business with that touches your network, contractors, um, advisors, software, all of it. You guys are all aware of what it can be, but every one of those, that is how big your attack surface is. The other thing is, so we've already kind of talked about this earlier, 70% of the software code is open source and is probably already exposed, if not pre-compromised, because nobody is securing or auditing the in-between. And those in-between areas are the one I talked about. You can combine pretty much all the tools, and there's nobody that does that to speak of. I know of one group that does has kind of an interesting approach to it that looks like it might work, but that's it. And the thing I've discovered after talking to various people, SBOMs are great. It's great that SBOMs are required, but the effective output from SBOMs is equivalent to Ancestry.com DNA tests when it comes to software. So I'm going to be doing some deep research into SBOMs and how those can be made more relevant and effective in preventing some of this stuff. And I will pull that into my next presentation at a future point if anybody wants to have me back, or if they want to even come to an ISOC event in Houston, we'll probably present on that as well. I don't have my contact information on here, but I'm sure that Jonathan won't mind sharing that with anyone that has further questions. And please reach out to me. He has my email. He's got my LinkedIn. He's got all my contact information, and I'll be more than happy just to connect with you and take you through things or send you the appropriate information that you're looking for. So I appreciate everybody that sat through my presentation, and all those that are awake, double kudos to you.
Excellent job, Radar. It was really good. I appreciate it. I did go ahead and share your LinkedIn profile out there, so you might see a few extra connections pop in. And that was actually one of the questions as well. So I've got that out there. If anyone wants to click on that, feel free. And of course, Radar will take a look at you. So, any other questions before we sign off? Radar, great presentation. Again, I really appreciate you coming, and we'll try to get you in again for that larger presentation.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
All right. I don't see any other questions. One last thing I did want to mention, the Tulsa chapter has one more event this year that we're going to be doing. On December 2nd, we'll be doing a joint engagement with our IIA friends at the Tulsa Country Club. So that information should be coming out pretty soon. I believe this one's only going to be in person though, so mostly for folks that obviously they're in the Tulsa area. Oh, for CPE, we'll be uploading that directly into ISACA. So if Jenny, just to answer your question, if you gave us your ISACA ID number, or if you're in the Tulsa chapter, I'll be able to upload that automatically. If you didn't do that, please provide me with your ISACA ID number. You can just email it to me, and we can do that as well. Yeah, absolutely. If anyone happens to be in town, feel free. We treat this as anyone who's an ISACA member can join our events. So if anyone happens to be in the Tulsa area, that would be great. As I said, ordinarily we have our events kind of as a multicast where we have it in person and available remotely. So if you get the opportunity to do it remotely, great. If you happen to be in Tulsa, that would be a great opportunity to meet everyone in person. So. Again, thanks, Radar. Any other questions, comments from anyone? And Catherine, I just saw your question. I just put my email address in the chat. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you on December 2nd. Radar, like I said, we'll get you to come back whenever we get the opportunity, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.